Hello, this is Matt from Mattini Apps, and this is part 3 in our Introduction to SwiftUI series. In this video, we will take a look at stacks. We'll take a look at exactly what stacks are, why you should use them, and how you would use them, and we will then use stacks in a real-world example, and we will make this, a view that could be used in a chat app, which will show a profile picture, the user's name, and some text and a little green dot to show that the user is online. So we have some coding to do, so let's get to work. So let's start by hitting create a new Xcode project. This will be an iOS app, which we will call stacks. Make sure the interface is SwiftUI, the lifecycle is SwiftUI app, the language is Swift, and hit next, and save it up somewhere nice and safe. When your Xcode is ready to go, let's hit resume to kickstart our preview, and when you can see your preview, you're all ready to go. So as I said, in this video, we will take a look at stacks. Stacks are a really important part of SwiftUI, and they have two main purposes. Stacks can display multiple views, and they can be used to lay out your view. They really are a major building block when it comes to creating the structure of your UI and really laying out how your views and your screens in your app will look. So let's take a look at both of those important areas in turn, starting with displaying multiple views. So far in this series, we've taken a look at how to display text and images on the screen. We've done some pretty cool things with modifiers, but we've only ever made one view appear at a time. Let's take a look at what would happen if we try and make multiple views appear without using a stack. So for this, into our content view, into the body, and what we'll do, we will create a text view, nice and simple, nothing fancy, that will say hello. As expected, our text will appear over on the screen. Now the problem is, if we try and display another text view, something very odd happens over here to our preview. As you can see, we now have one preview that says hello, and another preview to show our second text object that says how are you. So clearly, that's not right. But why is this happening? So we've used this body here before, and we know that this is where we create our view and set it up with modifiers to make it look exactly as we want. We can see from this line here that body has to be of type SomeView. This body object can really be any view here in SwiftUI, but the golden rule is that it has to be one view. So as soon as we start to try and set up multiple views, things start to not go as planned. This is where stacks can come into play. A stack is one view that can contain multiple views. It's effectively one view showing multiple views. Using a stack, as you will see in just one moment, will let us display multiple views together on the same screen and on the same preview. So that's why we would use stacks to display multiple views. The other major purpose of stacks, as I said, is to set up the layout of the multiple views that we want to display. If we could do this and just give the body two text objects, we don't really have any control where these text objects should be. Should how are you be next to hello? Should it be under it? Should it be on top of it? There's no control there. When it comes to stacks, we can use one of 3 different types of stacks to say exactly this. We can use a H stack or a horizontal stack to say we want this text object next to this one. We can use a V stack or a vertical stack to say we want this object underneath this other object, or we could use a Z stack to layer these views literally on top of each other. We can then set up these stacks in the exact way that we want to get that layout control that we need. We'll take a look at each of these 3 stacks in turn. But before we do, one thing to bear in mind. These stacks will seem pretty basic, but you can combine them to build up some really complicated UIs. You can embed stacks within stacks, and they will very quickly start to build up. That's the beauty of SwiftUI. It's just small basic views built up working together to create something much bigger. So let's take a look at stacks in action. Let's start with a H stack, so a horizontal stack. So rather than just having these 2 text objects here sort of just hanging around by themselves in the body, what we will do, we will wrap them into a H stack object by literally saying H stack, open curly bracket, and then we can pop these 2 text objects within the H stack, like so. Now, as you can see, we only have one preview and both of our text objects are together. In a H stack, our 2 text objects are positioned next to each other. The order of our views does matter, with the first item here being on the left, with each extra item being positioned to the right. So for example, we could add another object here. So for example, a smiley face. And as this is third on the list, it will be on the far right. So we can add more items here. First item on the left, working its way to the right. But for today, we'll stick to these 2 items. So this is a very basic layout using stacks. We've told our views to be next to each other. But as I said, we can set up our stacks in certain ways to get that complete control over how this layout should work. So what we can do, when we initialize our H stack, we can pass in a couple of extra parameters. In case you're wondering, the content parameter here, which is the third one along, is what we're already using to specify the views that we want to show. But there are 2 other things that we can set here. For example, we can pass in how much spacing we want between these items. By default, the spacing is set to 8, and as you can see, that default is a nice little gap between the 2. But we can change this. We could pass in 0, for example, to have no gap between our 2 objects, or we could pass in a really big number to have a much bigger space. As an important note about spacing, we do get this default amount of spacing, which is consistent when we have a standalone stack. However, the default spacing for stacks is actually inherited down. So when we come to embedding stacks within stacks, default will probably be a little bit different. So to me, it's best practice to always specify how much spacing you want to make sure you don't get any unexpected results. We can also pass in an alignment parameter. And to really see what this can do, the first thing we will do is we will add a line break to our how are you text, like so. So how are you is split across 2 lines. In a H stack, the alignment we can set refers to where these items are positioned vertically. So let's see this in action. What we can do, we can pass in an alignment. This has to go before the spacing. And here we have a few different options. The default is center, so these items are aligned in the center of the H stack vertically. Just like with spacing, if you embed stacks within stacks, this default is also inherited down. But we could also set this to top, for example, and now all of our items are aligned to the top of the H stack. So the alignment, as I said, in a H stack controls the vertical alignment. And this makes sense because we will use our spacing to control how these views are positioned horizontally, so we will use the alignment to control how these views are positioned vertically. Let's set this back to the default, which is center. And that, honestly, at the very root of it, is effectively all a stack view is. A stack view will take a number of different views with a spacing and alignment, and it will lay out these views in the way that we want. Now, before we jump on to look at another stack, there's one more thing about stacks I want to show you. In a stack, we can use a new object called a spacer. A spacer has one job, really, to take as much room as possible. So for example, say we want all these objects in a stack to be on the far right of the screen. What we can do, we can add a spacer to the start of our stack. This spacer will take all of this room possible, effectively bumping these 2 items over to the right of the screen. We could use a spacer also at the end of the stack, which would take all of the room available on the right hand side to bump these views over to the left. Or what we could do, we could put a spacer in the middle, which would then take all of the space possible between the views to kind of really separate them out as far as possible. Spacers are really good in a stack when you sort of want to bump all your views over one way or get as much room as possible between the views. So that is a H stack. So let's move on and take a look at a V stack. So for this, let's get rid of our spacer and we will get rid of all of these extra parameters for the H stack. Let's take this back to a nice basic H stack. And we will also get rid of this line break like this. So just as we have a H stack to position these views horizontally, we also have a V stack for positioning these views vertically. So all we've got to do is change our H stack to a V stack, and straight away our views are now positioned one above the other, working its way down vertically. Again, the order matters. Whichever view is first will be on the top, working its way down with each extra view in the stack. And honestly, a V stack works in the exact same way as a H stack, apart from it is vertical. So we have our spacing, which this time has a default spacing of 0, but we can increase this to say something like 10 to get that bigger space between our items. And it also has the alignment, this time because it's a V stack, so we're controlling our views vertically with our spacing. This time the alignment is horizontal. By default, it's center. So as you can see, our views are in the center of our stack, but we can change this to leading to make all of our views line up on the left, or trailing to make all of our views line up on the right. Just like H stacks, we again have spaces, where it'll take as much room as possible, bumping hello right to the top of the screen, just underneath the safe area, so where the time would normally be, and how are you right to the bottom of the screen. And again, this could be positioned in the exact same way. So for example, if it's the first item, hello and how are you are both right at the bottom of the screen. And if it's underneath, just to do all of the options possible, both of our items we bumped to the top. So V-stacks, very similar to H-stacks, but it will lay out our views vertically. So there's one more stack we need to look at before we can jump in and put all of these skills together to make something cool. And that is a Z stack, or a Z stack, depends how you want to say it. So let's strip this stack back down. And let's change our V stack to a Z stack. And as you can see, what this will do is stack up our text views one on top of the other in the same position. So for this, imagine that our hello object is put down first, and then our how are you object is placed on top. And they will just stack their way up one in front of the other. When it comes to passing in the extra parameters, we can only pass in an alignment, because the spacing wouldn't really make much sense, because we have no idea what this spacing is, because it's a 2D app. When it comes to the alignment, for a Z stack, we have a whole bunch of options to control the alignment both vertically and horizontally. So for example, we have leading, we have top leading to get one of the corners, and so on. So that is the third stack. We have H stacks, V stacks, and Z stacks. You use each in similar ways, but all getting different results. So now that we know the theory of stacks and kind of how they work, let's put all of our new skills together and let's make something cool. So as we looked at the start of this video, we will now use stacks to make this. This example view could be used in a chat app to show a user and to show that they are online. So let's break this down. Let's understand how this view would work. This will be a H stack with an image on one side and a V stack on the other. The V stack over here on the right will have some text at the top, and in the bottom part, another H stack to show the dot and the text. It's pretty much simple views and embedding stacks to get a pretty cool result. So let's get to work. So the first thing that we have to do for this is to import an image into Xcode, because we will use that as part of this new view. So over into our assets folder, and we'll drag an image into here. For this, use a picture of yourself or anyone you want really. My picture is here on my desktop, which I will drag it into the assets folder. As always, remember the name of your image. You will need to use it in just 1 second. And back to our content view. And let's start by getting rid of our Z stack to get rid of that example, because we're now going to put something real together. So we know we need to start with a H stack, like so. If your preview is still showing your Z stack, make sure to hit resume. And we know in this H stack, the first thing that we will need is an image. So as we learned about last time, we can set up a brand new image, like so. If you need a recap about making images in SwiftUI, I'll put a little card at the top corner of the screen with a link to part 2 in this series. And again, as we learned all about last time, we will now modify this image to have it in the exact way that we want. So for this, we will use resizable to change the size of the image. We will use scaled to fit. Feel free to use scale to fill if your image isn't a perfect square. We will set the frame to be about 50 by 50. We will keep the alignment to center. And then just to get fancy, just because it's so easy in SwiftUI, we will make this circle with a clip shape modifier, passing in a circle. We will give it a border. So recap again, we will use the overlay modifier, passing in the circle, which will have a stroke where we can set the color. For this, I'll use a white border with a line width of 1, something really subtle. And as you can't really see that on the white background, we will give this a little bit of shadow just to make it pop, like so. So as you can see, we now have the profile picture of our view all set up. So next up on our object to make is the right-hand side of our H stack. The image is done, let's focus on this text. So this is now going to be a V stack with 2 different sections. So within the H stack, remember we're going to embed these stacks within each other, we will set up a V stack. The top layer will be text, which is going to be the name of the user. And because this is the username, we will make this bold. We'll also set this to have a line limit of 1 I think it's a really good habit to get into setting how many lines you expect this to have. If this is a username, we know we'd only ever want this on one line. So that's the first bit of our text in the V stack. Underneath this, we now want a H stack because we want a circle and some text. So within the V stack, after our text, let's make a brand new H stack, which, let's do the easy one first. We'll have some text that will say online, which we will give a font size of 10 using the font. Again, done this all in part 1 of this series with a system font of about 10. And now we want this little green dot here just as an extra little bit of detail to show the user is online. So as this is the H stack and the ordering matters, we have to have this before the text object within this H stack, the one that will sit here. And for this, what we would do, we will use a circle object, which will be by default massive, which we will make green using the fill modifier, set in a color, which is green. And we will give this a frame because we do not want this is massive. So we're going to use 4 by 4, just like so. So we now have used 3 different stacks, all embedded within each other, and some basic text views, a basic image view, and this little circle to bring our view together. The problem is this clearly doesn't look right. And the problem honestly just comes down to spacing and alignment. So as a bit of a challenge for you, I wanted to go through each of these 3 stacks, trying to set some spacing and alignment to make this look how it's supposed to look. So pause the video, give it a go, and then jump back in. So let's start with the V stack. I think this is our biggest offender here. This clearly doesn't look right. So let's find our V stack, which is holding our text and our H stack. And we will pass in an alignment, which is leading. So these are both lined up on the left. And this gap is way, way, way too big. We'll give this a spacing of 0 to really bring these together. Straight away, see how much better that looks? It's these tiny details that really make these views pop. Secondly, I think our online text is a little bit too far from our green dot. So let's pass in a spacing of 4 to really bring that up close to our green dot to make it look nice and compact. And then finally, if I'm being really, really picky, I think the profile picture is a little bit too close to the user info. So let's find our overall H stack and let's pass in a spacing of about 12. Nice little bit of room between the profile picture to give that the space to really pop out, and user info, which still really stands out to me pretty much because of that bold text. But enough room for both parts of this now to really shine through. And that is pretty much it. As I said, in SwiftUI, all we really have to do is build fairly basic views and put them together using stacks in the right way, and then we can start to build up these bigger, bit more complicated views. So that is how you can use stacks in SwiftUI, and that wraps up this video. As always, leave any questions or comments down in the comment section. If you liked watching this video, which I really hope you did, make sure to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and once again, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.